It happened on a Tuesday. I still remember the morning sunlight slanting through the living room blinds, catching on the dust in the air like tiny golden particles frozen mid-flight. My coffee had gone cold on the side table, untouched. I was scrolling through a group text from my church ladies. Nothing important, just photos of someone's new cat. When my son, Travis, walked in, he didn't knock, didn't say good morning, just stood there in the doorway with that same impatient frown he always wore lately, like he'd been chewing on frustration since sunrise. Without a word, he marched over, snatched the phone from my hands, and with one quick, vicious motion, hurled it onto the hardwood floor. The sound it made, it wasn't just a crack. It was a snap, a shatter, like something deeper than glass had just broken. I gasped, not because of the phone, but because of the look in his eyes. No guilt, no hesitation, just cold certainty. "You don't need this anymore," he said, voice low and flat. "I'll handle everything from now on." I stared at him, heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my neck. My jaw moved, trying to form words, but my throat was tight, like my body knew something before my mind did. He didn't raise his voice, didn't curse. That's what made it worse. This wasn't a tantrum. It was control. Absolute, deliberate control. "I'm your son," he added, softer now, as if that somehow justified what he'd done. "It's time I took over. You're not exactly at your best anymore." I stood there, barefoot on cold floorboards, watching the cracked screen blink one last time before going black. And something inside me, something old and buried, finally stirred. Not anger. Not yet. But something alert. Awake. That night, I didn't sleep. While Travis snored in the guest room like nothing had happened, I sat at the kitchen table, pen in hand, writing down everything I could still remember. Account numbers, passwords, names of friends I'd drifted from. I had no plan yet, just a need to preserve what was left of me. Every few minutes, I'd glance toward the hall, afraid he might hear the creak of my chair or the rustle of paper. But he didn't. He was used to me being silent. By sunrise, I'd packed a single overnight bag, just enough to avoid suspicion. My heart raced as I zipped it closed, and I kept telling myself I wasn't running. I was reclaiming something. What exactly, I didn't know yet. But when I stepped out the door, I didn't look back, and when Travis finally realized I was gone, he had no idea what I'd already done. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. The bus station smelled like burnt coffee and disinfectant. I sat there on a stiff plastic bench, clutching my overnight bag in one hand and a paper ticket in the other. I'd paid in cash. The clerk had looked me over twice, probably wondering what a 63-year-old woman was doing booking a one-way ride to a town she clearly didn't belong to. I didn't care. Let them wonder. The ride was long and mostly quiet, except for the rattling of the windows and the occasional cough from the man sitting behind me. I stared out the window, watching the trees blur into green smears, thinking about everything and nothing. My hands kept twitching toward my lap, instinctively searching for my phone, which wasn't there. Travis had made sure of that. He didn't just want to manage my life. He wanted to erase the parts he couldn't control. But he'd underestimated me. Before leaving, I'd done something he didn't expect. I'd logged into the joint account. Yes, the one he'd insisted we share to help pay bills, and printed every statement from the last 6 months. I'd seen the transfers, I'd seen the amounts, and I'd taken the files to a USB drive I'd tucked into my bra, right next to my heart. Not out of sentiment, but out of survival. I got off in a little town called Westbrook. It wasn't a place I had any ties to, which was exactly why I chose it. But I wasn't entirely alone. My late husband's cousin, Francine, lived 20 minutes outside of town in a mobile home park that backed up to a dense stretch of forest. We hadn't spoken in years, not since Howard's funeral. But when I showed up on her porch with swollen feet and no phone, she didn't hesitate. She hugged me with arms that smelled like menthol rub and lavender dryer sheets and said, "Come in, June. Sit down before your bones give out." Francine didn't ask too many questions that first night. She handed me a warm towel, some of her husband's old pajamas, and told me I could stay as long as I needed. Her kindness made me cry in the shower, the water barely masking the sound. I hadn't realized how long it had been since someone treated me like a person, not a burden, not a problem to be solved, not a project to be managed. The next morning, we sat at her kitchen table eating biscuits out of a tube, and I told her everything, from the phone to the money to the way Travis had started using phrases like power of attorney and safety concerns. She listened without blinking, just nodding, her spoon tapping lightly against her ceramic mug. When I finished, she reached across the table and squeezed my hand with surprising strength. "I've seen this before," she said. "They don't think we're people once we start getting gray. They think we're furniture with memories." That sentence hit me harder than anything Travis ever said. I was still a person. I remembered things. I felt things. I wasn't going to be shoved in a corner like a forgotten throw pillow. I told her I needed to do something. Not just escape, but take something back. She looked at me carefully, then slowly smiled. "Well," she said, "you know what that boy of yours really values, don't you?" I nodded. "Control." She leaned in, whispering like we were planning a heist. "Then let's take some of it away." And just like that, I wasn't alone anymore. We spent the next 2 days combing through every printout I'd brought with me. Francine put on her strongest reading glasses and laid the pages out across her tiny dining table, muttering like she was deciphering an ancient scroll. Every so often, she'd let out a quiet, or a sharper, "Well, I'll be damned," when a pattern started to emerge. I hadn't fully understood the scope of it until then, how subtle Travis had been. Small amounts at first. $50 here, 100 there. Labeled medical expenses, groceries, gas. Reasonable things. Then, as the months rolled on, it grew bolder. 400 for home maintenance, 800 for a consultation, 1,000 for something cryptically marked as transition prep. "Transition to what?" Francine barked. "Early retirement on your dime?" I just shook my head. The betrayal stung. Not because of the money itself, but because of the smug confidence behind it. He hadn't even bothered to hide it well. He assumed I'd never look. Maybe he thought I couldn't look. That night, while Francine poured 2 glasses of boxed wine, her evening ritual, I sat on the couch and stared at an old photo album she'd pulled from under the coffee table. There was a picture of Howard, my late husband, holding Travis on his shoulders at the zoo, both of them smiling like nothing in the world could ever go wrong. I touched the edge of the page and felt my throat tighten. Where had that boy gone? The one who used to kiss my cheek and draw me crayon cards that said, "I love you more than dinosaurs"? Francine sat beside me, her voice soft now. "He didn't get this way overnight, June. But you didn't get a week overnight either. You're here. That counts." I took a slow sip of wine. "I want to hit back." She smiled. "Good." The plan started small. First, I opened a private checking account at a local credit union using the little cash I had left, and a state ID I'd nearly forgotten I still had tucked in my wallet. Then, with Francine's help, I sent a written request to freeze the joint account, citing fraud and elder abuse concerns. Francine even coached me through writing a formal affidavit, which she signed as a witness. It felt terrifying and thrilling, like sneaking out after curfew when I was a teenager. Travis hadn't contacted me since I left. Not a single call or message. Not that I'd know, with no phone. Francine had a landline, but we kept the ringer off unless we were expecting someone. A part of me wanted to believe he was worried, that he was out there searching, scared something had happened. But the more honest part of me knew he was probably just angry he'd lost his leverage. The silence was telling. On the third morning, the credit union called. The account was officially frozen. Travis wouldn't be able to touch a penny until things were sorted through formal channels. I hung up the phone and stood there, hand trembling, staring at Francine with wide eyes. "You did it," she said, arms folded. "He's going to be furious." "Let him be." I nodded slowly. For the first time in years, I wasn't reacting. I was acting. And I wasn't finished. The call came late afternoon, 2 days after the account freeze. Francine and I were out in her backyard, her hanging laundry, me weeding the flower beds she hadn't touched in months. It was peaceful, sunlight filtering through the trees, birds calling out like gossiping neighbors, and then the landline rang through the window. The sound made my stomach knot. Francine looked at me. "Want me to answer?" I nodded, suddenly cold despite the heat. She stepped inside and picked it up, keeping her voice calm. "Henderson residence." There was a pause. Then I heard her tone shift slightly. "No, she's not available to speak right now, and if you call again with that attitude, we'll consider it harassment." Click. She returned outside with a smirk. "Your boy's rattled." "What did he say?" Francine wiped her hands on her apron, started barking about frozen assets, legal rights, said you were confused and needed supervision. He even mentioned getting the court involved. I felt something in me go rigid. He's trying to have me declared incompetent. Francine nodded slowly. He knows the only way to regain access is to paint you as unstable. The air around us felt heavier. I thought about how Travis used to look at me when I forgot where I left the keys, or when I called his ex-girlfriend by the wrong name. The sighs, the pitying half-smile, the way he'd say, "You sure you're okay, Mom?" Like it wasn't really a question, but a script he rehearsed for some future moment. This moment. That night, I sat down with Francine and told her everything, not just about the bank, about the slow way Travis had chipped away at my confidence, the locked drawers, the bills I was no longer allowed to see. The doctor's appointment I didn't even know had been scheduled until the receptionist called to confirm. I hadn't realized how deep it had gone until I said it all out loud. Francine took my hand. "You know this isn't just financial abuse. It's emotional, too." "I let it happen," I whispered. "No," she said firmly. "You survived it. There's a difference." The next morning, I walked down to the local library and signed up for a new email address. Then I logged into a few old contacts I still remembered and reached out. One of them was Deborah Holloway, a friend I hadn't seen in 6 years. We used to run a community reading group before Travis started making me feel like my hobbies were childish distractions. She wrote back in under an hour. "Where have you been? We all miss you. Call me." Now, I felt tears well up in my eyes, the screen blurring. I wasn't erased, not yet. I also sent a message to an attorney whose name had been recommended in a pamphlet about elder abuse Francine kept from her church. He agreed to a preliminary consultation, free of charge. He said I wasn't the first person to reach out about a concerned child quietly taking control of an aging parent's estate. He used the phrase, legal manipulation through familial trust. That phrase stayed with me the rest of the day. Legal manipulation. familial trust, two things I'd always kept separate, but not anymore. That evening, Francine came into the living room carrying an old smartphone of hers. It was scratched up, but functional. "It still takes a SIM card," she said. "You can have it." I took it with both hands, like it was fragile, like it was sacred. And when I turned it on, the first thing I did was change the emergency contact. The first message I got on the new phone wasn't from Deborah or the lawyer. It was from Travis. Somehow he had found the number, probably through a shared contact or bank paperwork I hadn't scrubbed clean. It was short, all uppercase letters. "We need to talk. You're making a mess of things." I didn't reply, but I stared at the screen for a long time, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from habit. Years of keeping the peace. Years of flinching before speaking. Francine walked in, saw my expression, and sat beside me. "Let him wait," she said, and I slid the phone face down across the table. Instead, I called the lawyer, Mr. Alton. His voice was calm and assured, the kind of man who'd probably seen worse. He told me I had every right to be where I was, and freezing the account had been the correct move under the circumstances. But then he asked something that made my breath hitch. "Has he filed for guardianship yet?" I said no, not yet. "Well, if he does," he said gently, "you'll want to be ready. Judges don't always see the subtle stuff. They look for proof, witnesses, paperwork." I thanked him and hung up, my head spinning. I'd left because of control, but now I realized Travis could try to legally make me his ward. A woman with no rights, no voice, just a signature to be managed. That night, Francine handed me her spare notebook. "Write down everything," she said. "Dates, memories, things he's said or done. Think of it like a witness list, except the witness is you." So I wrote. I sat in the recliner under the soft yellow light and wrote until my hand cramped. I wrote about the doctor's appointment I hadn't asked for. The lawyer he once casually mentioned, just in case I ever slipped. The time he brought over home care brochures and called it a light conversation. Each entry came out shaky, raw, but undeniable. And as I wrote, I started to feel something strange, something I hadn't felt in years. Power, not loud, not flashy, just steady, mine. 2 days later, I got another call, this time from a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer. But something told me to. A woman's voice. Professional? Clipped. "Ms. Whitlow, this is Sandra from Montgomery County Court. We've received a petition for emergency guardianship filed by your son, Travis Whitlow. Do you have legal representation?" My mouth went dry. "Yes," I said without hesitation. "I do." "Then you'll want to contact them. There's a preliminary hearing scheduled for next Thursday." After I hung up, I sat perfectly still. My heart wasn't pounding. It was thudding, slow, heavy, deliberate. Like my body understood what this meant before my brain could catch up. Francine didn't say, "I told you so." She just put a cup of tea in front of me and said, "Then, next Thursday, we show them exactly who you are." That evening, I got another text from Travis. "This could have been avoided. You're confused. Just come home and we'll figure this out like family. Family." The word sat there on the screen like a threat disguised as love. I didn't reply. I deleted the message. Then I called Deborah. She answered in a rush, breathless and excited. "June? Oh my God. It's really you?" "I need a favor," I said. "A big one." "Name it." "I need a ride to a courthouse next Thursday, and someone to sit beside me so I don't feel invisible." Without hesitation, she said, "I'll be there, and I'll bring backup." For the first time since this began, I smiled without forcing it. The courthouse sat like a stone monolith on the edge of downtown, flanked by tall oaks and a parking lot littered with faded yellow lines. Thursday came too quickly, and though I'd rehearsed what I'd say a dozen times in front of the mirror, my hands still trembled as I buttoned up my blouse. Francine stood behind me, brushing invisible lint from my shoulders, murmuring, "You've already won, June. Showing up is the win." Deborah picked us up just before 9, her car smelling of peppermint gum and nervous energy. She had brought along her daughter, Mia, tall, sharp-eyed, and studying social work. For backup, Deborah had said. Mia gave me a quick nod, like she already knew the whole story and had decided I was worth defending. When we entered the building, my knees went stiff. I don't know if it was fear or anger, but it felt like I was walking through thick mud. Still, I kept going. I'd spent too long letting someone else walk over me. Courtroom 5 was colder than I expected, both in temperature and atmosphere. There were maybe a dozen people inside, a clerk tapping at a keyboard, and a judge seated already, leafing through a folder with an expression that made my stomach twist. Then I saw Travis. He was seated at the petitioner's table, hair slicked back, wearing a suit I didn't recognize. Not the boy from the zoo photos. Not the teenager who used to fall asleep on the couch with popcorn in his lap. No. This was a stranger. And when he saw me enter, something flickered in his eyes. Disbelief, then irritation, as if he genuinely hadn't expected me to show up. His lawyer stood and began listing grievances like reading from a script, concerns about my mental state, unusual behavior, social withdrawal. They even referenced my disappearance and the freezing of the account as signs of instability. I sat still, heart thudding, trying to keep my face neutral while inside. My blood buzzed like static. Then my lawyer stood. Mr. Alton didn't raise his voice, didn't dramatize a word. He simply laid out the facts, the transactions, the unsolicited medical appointments, the withdrawn contact, the messages, the printed account statements. Then he handed over my notebook. "And finally," he said, turning toward the judge, "my client is here today of her own will, after traveling across state lines, securing independent housing, opening her own bank account, and reestablishing social and legal support. That is not the behavior of an incompetent woman. That is the behavior of someone escaping coercion." The room was silent. The judge leaned forward. "Do you have anyone here willing to speak on your behalf, Ms. Whitlow?" Deborah stood first, voice shaky but strong. She led our community reading group for 5 years. She brought food to neighbors who were sick. She went quiet because she was being isolated, not because she was unwell. Then Francine. I've known June for over 30 years. She's sharp, she's capable, and she was brave enough to leave a bad situation. That's not weakness. That's survival. Even Mia stood up. "Your Honor, I work with elder clients every day. Everything Miss Whitlow described lines up with common patterns of emotional and financial abuse. She doesn't need a guardian. She needs protection from one." I could barely breathe. My eyes were hot, and I bit the inside of my cheek to stay grounded. The judge finally turned to me. "Ms. Whitlow, is there anything you'd like to say?" I stood. My voice caught once, then steadied. "I'm not confused. I'm not lost. I left because someone I love tried to shrink me down to silence. And for the first time in a long while, I chose to speak." The judge ruled that afternoon. I don't think I breathed the entire time she spoke. Her words came slow and measured, but they might as well have been thunder. The guardianship was denied. No further hearings. No restrictions. No monitoring period. Just a clear dismissal of Travis's petition. As of today, she said, looking Travis square in the face, Ms. Whitlow retains full legal and financial autonomy. This court finds no cause for intervention. I don't remember standing up. I just remember the relief flooding my chest like warm water after frostbite. Francine squeezed my shoulder. Deborah whispered, "That's it. It's over." But I knew better. The court decision was a line in the sand. But the war wasn't over. Not inside me. Not with Travis still out there. He didn't say a word as we left. He stood by the window, phone already in hand, probably texting someone about how ungrateful I was, or how the system failed. He wouldn't look at me, and oddly enough, that hurt more than if he'd yelled. The silence wasn't neutral. It was punishment. Back at Francine's, we celebrated with microwaved peach cobbler and instant coffee. It wasn't fancy, but it felt earned. Mia even hugged me goodbye and said she hoped I'd speak at her school one day about elder empowerment or reclaiming your voice. I laughed, then cried, and then we laughed again. For the first time in a long while, I felt seen. That night, though, something stirred in me that I couldn't ignore. The part of me that had been conditioned to flinch, to smooth things over, to not make it worse. I sat on the porch, alone, moonlight casting silver shadows across the dirt path leading to Francine's garden. And I realized I wasn't done. Not really. I had run. I had survived. I had defended myself in court. But I hadn't told him what it did to me, what it cost. So I called him. He picked up on the second ring, his voice cold. "What do you want?" I didn't yell. I didn't beg. "I want you to know what you did," I said softly. Not what the judge said. What you did. You took my voice. You isolated me. You made me doubt myself every single day. He scoffed. I was trying to help. "You smashed my phone," I said. "You erased my connections. You stole money you labeled transition prep. Was that for me or for you?" He went silent. "I remember everything, Travis. The brochures, the lies. You weren't planning for my future. You were carving out space for yours. Without me." He still didn't speak, so I ended it. "I'm not coming back. Not ever. And I don't want another text. Not until you know what an apology really is." Then I hung up. My hand shook, but my chest felt still. Not hollow, not sad, just still. The next morning, I went to the community center with Francine and signed up to volunteer for their senior tech literacy program. The director said, "We've been trying to get someone to teach smartphone basics for ages." I smiled. I know a little something about that. Word spread faster than I expected. By the end of the week, 2 other women, both regulars at the community center, approached me in the hallway while I was refilling the printer paper. One leaned in and whispered, "I heard what you said in court." The other added, "My son's been trying to get me to sign over my house. He says I'm getting scattered, but I'm still the one paying his mortgage." I didn't offer legal advice. I wasn't a lawyer, but I did offer coffee. And I listened. By the following Monday, we had a little circle going. Just 4 of us at first. Francine called it the second voice group. We met under the pretense of learning how to use Google Docs. But between lessons, we talked about passwords, bills, boundaries. Most of all, we talked about the invisible kind of harm, the kind that smiles while it strips you down. Some days, the stories crushed me, but more often, they lit a fire in my chest. I wasn't alone. I wasn't rare. I was just one of the few who got out. Francine saw it too. "You're becoming dangerous," she joked one evening as we sat on her porch. "In a good way." I laughed. "You think Travis knows?" "Absolutely. Men like him can feel when the leash is gone." Speaking of which, I hadn't heard from him in over a week. That silence had once scared me. Now it empowered me. He could live in whatever narrative he wanted. I was busy living in truth. One morning, while sorting old emails, I came across a file I'd forgotten about, something from the early days of Travis's help. It was a scanned draft of a living will he had encouraged me to sign, one where he was listed as sole executor, power of attorney, and medical proxy. I remembered the day he first showed it to me. We were sitting on the back patio, and he had spoken in that sweet, concerned voice. "It's just so we're prepared, Mom. You know, in case something happens, I'd never want anyone else making decisions for you." At the time, I'd smiled and nodded. I didn't sign it then, but I came close. Too close. Now, looking at it again with new eyes, I realized what it really was: a quiet erasure and a warning. I printed it out, slid it into a folder labeled Closed Chapters, and filed it in Francine's cabinet next to her property tax receipts. That was the past, documented, but no longer in control. Later that week, Deborah invited me to speak at a women's luncheon. I hesitated. I wasn't polished. I didn't have a speech prepared or a slideshow, but she insisted. Just show up and be yourself. That's what people need. So I did. The room held maybe 30 women, all over 50, with faces marked by both kindness and exhaustion. I didn't tell them everything, but I told them enough. I told them how one day my son smashed my phone and told me I didn't need it anymore. I told them how I stayed quiet. Until I didn't. I told them about the notebook, the hearing, the first text message I deleted without shame. When I finished, no one clapped right away. They just sat there, silent, seeing me. And in that stillness, I understood something that hadn't fully clicked before. This wasn't just about me anymore. The day I finally stepped back into my old house, the air smelled different. Not dusty or stale, just wrong, like someone else had lived there in my absence. Francine waited in the driveway while I walked through the front door with slow, steady steps. The keys Travis never changed, still jangling in my hand. It wasn't a court order or an argument that brought me back. It was a decision. One I made on my own terms. The house was still legally mine, always had been. Travis had just hoped I'd never return. But that morning, with sunlight breaking through the clouds like a promise, I'd told Francine, "I think I need to close the door myself." The living room was eerily clean. Too clean. No dust on the mantel, no clutter on the coffee table. He'd been here, recently, but his presence was nowhere to be found. Not a note, not a message, not even a pair of shoes. It was like he'd tried to wipe himself from the space, except for one thing. On the dining room table sat a check, folded once, my name scrawled on the front in Travis's handwriting. I opened it slowly. $15,000. No note, no explanation, just the check. At first, I thought it was some twisted olive branch. A bribe, maybe, or guilt dressed up as generosity. Then I realized what it really was. A final insult. $15,000. For life. For silence. For closure he thought he could buy. I didn't rip it. I didn't scream. I just left it there and walked upstairs. My old bedroom still smelled faintly like lavender. In the top drawer of my nightstand, I found my old wallet. Empty. My framed photo of Howard, face down, but I wasn't here for memories. I opened the closet, pulled down a single box from the top shelf, and carried it to the bed. Inside were documents: my marriage certificate, my deed, my medical directives, even a letter I'd written myself 5 years ago when I'd first started to feel like I was disappearing. I read it again, slowly. It said, "If you're reading this, it's not too late to come back to yourself." Then I locked the box and walked it back to the car. When I got in, Francine looked over. How'd it feel? I stared out at the house, the walls I'd cooked in, cried in, loved in, and then almost lost myself in, like it's not home anymore, I said. And that's okay. Later that week, I donated the check to the community center, quietly, anonymously. But I left a note in the envelope. For the ones finding their voices again, from someone who remembers what silence feels like. On Sunday, I wore my favorite green cardigan and sat in the front row of a women's panel I helped organize. We weren't experts. We were just women who lived through something and came out stronger. During the closing remarks, the moderator asked if anyone wanted to share a final thought. I stood. I was told once I didn't need a phone, I said, that someone else would handle everything for me. And for a long time, I let that be true. I let someone decide how big my world should be. But the moment I walked out that door, I realized something. Smallness isn't safety. Silence doesn't protect you. It only helps them forget you exist. The room was still. I'm not here today because I'm brave. I'm here because I got tired of being erased. And for the first time when they clapped, I let myself feel it. Not for the performance, but for the truth. A month later, I got a letter, not from Travis, but from his lawyer. A polite, bland document stating that Travis had relinquished all interest or intent to challenge Ms. Whitlow's autonomy or property. No apology, no acknowledgement. Just the final curtain on a power play that never should have happened. I didn't cry. I didn't even frown. I folded the paper in half, slid it into the same file where I kept my guardianship ruling, and locked the drawer. That chapter. Sealed. By then, the second voice group had tripled in size. We were up to 12 women, some from out of town, some with stories that made mine feel tame. One had been tricked into signing over her retirement fund. Another had been removed from a family trust without her knowledge. But when we sat in that dusty meeting room with coffee and lemon bars from Francine's kitchen, we weren't victims. We were architects, redrawing the blueprints of our lives together. One afternoon, I found myself back at the bus station where this all began. I was there with one of our newer members, Terry, who had just left her husband after 28 years of slow, quiet erasure. She stood with her purse clutched in both hands, tears on her cheeks, but fire in her eyes. I don't even know where I'm going, she whispered. I smiled and touched her elbow. Neither did I. That's how you know you're free. As her bus pulled away, I sat on the same plastic bench where I once trembled, alone, with my bag in my lap and no plan. This time, I didn't feel small. I felt steady. And then, almost without thinking, I pulled out my phone, the one Francine gave me, now upgraded with a floral case and my own fingerprint ID, and opened a new email draft. I wrote to myself, not the past self, not the fearful version, but the woman I had become. Dear June, this is what it looks like to choose yourself, not with noise, not with revenge, but with quiet, stubborn certainty. You don't owe anyone your silence, not your time, not your peace. You have already paid more than enough. I hit send and watched the message disappear into the inbox labeled Saved. A little digital promise, tucked away in case I ever needed reminding. Back at Francine's, I found her in the garden, elbow deep in tomato vines. She looked up and grinned. Well, did you say goodbye? I thought about it. No, I said. I said thank you. Because as strange as it sounds, I wasn't angry anymore. Not at Travis. Not at myself. The anger had been a bridge, and I'd already crossed it. That night, I stood in front of the mirror with my green cardigan on, phone in one hand, and took a picture. Just me, smiling. Not for anyone else, just to prove I was here. Whole, visible, unmanaged. And that picture? It's now the lock screen on my phone. So if anyone ever tries to take it from me again, they'll have to look me in the eye and see exactly who they're dealing with.